now. So my name is Monica McCouvery. I am the Wildlife Education Specialist with the Nebraska Game and Parks Commission here in the Lincoln office. And hopefully everyone is here for a Science of Animal Architects today. So this is not a very talked about subject. I think we talk about little bits and pieces, but when you put it all together, it's kind of a really cool topic. So before I get going, I would like to introduce, hopefully you all can hear her because I can't, but this is Amber. I'll go ahead and give it over to her. She's going to be my co-host today. So Amber, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us today. My name is Amber Schiltz. I'm the Wildlife Education Program Manager for the Fish and Education Wildlife Division here at Game and Parks. And we're excited to see everyone here today, even virtually. And this is a really cool subject, so I'm excited to learn more about it. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and I will be watching the chat as we go along. Unfortunately, Monica's computer right now, she can't hear anyone. So if you do have to, if you want to ask a question at the end, feel free to. We'll have time to do that, and I will type it into her, and we will get your questions asked for sure. So thank you so much for joining, and I'll let Monica go.
Awesome. Okay, I'll just assume you're done with this because I was trying to read your lips, but I can't. So, okay.
Good.
So thanks, Amber. Yeah, if you have any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat. I will watch the chat as much as I can. There are some little kind of breaks with different, as we kind of transition into some different topics. So I will check the chat during that time. And then just like normal, I will have a little few minutes afterwards to answer your questions. So, all right, we will go ahead and get started. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about animal architects. And this is kind of there's bits and pieces I feel like people talk about all the time, but we don't hear the full story or we don't understand why these animals do it. There are quite a few animals that are not in Nebraska that make outrageous and extravagant homes and things like that. But there are also a few in Nebraska, there's a lot in Nebraska actually, that make their own homes that we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about those today. So, all right, I'll go ahead and share my screen with all of you. All right, everyone sees the big, perfect. All right, so like we talked about, we're gonna be doing some animal architects today. So this is animals that build their own homes or build structures to put their eggs in or their nest or anything like that. So we're gonna be talking about a wide range of animals today. All right, so just like normal, please feel free to use the chat for questions or cool comments. Amber will be doing the monitoring and I will check them occasionally too. Just keep it relevant to the topic at hand. Just be nice to everybody. I'm sure we will not have a problem, but if for some reason we do, just letting you know that you can be removed. And also something I want to let everybody know, I am definitely not an expert in any of these subjects. I do a ton of research. I really feel an interest to all of these, but however, I am not an expert. So if there's a question that I cannot answer or don't know, I can definitely figure it out for you and then and follow up with you later. So. All right, so let's go ahead and just jump in. We got a lot to cover today. So we're going to be talking about some insects today. There's a ton of insects that I didn't even touch on just because of time reasons. And then we'll also talk about some non-insects as well, but they didn't really fit into another category. So. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in with termites. So termites are considered a pest animal. People don't like them, especially in your homes and your businesses. I'm not sure if anyone else from Game and Parks is on, but here in the Lincoln office, at least, we had a huge termite problem a couple years ago now in the basement. And now that I know what all these things were that I was seeing in the basement, I was like, oh yeah, they're everywhere in the basement. So it's kind of interesting. But so insects or termites are insects. They look very different depending on the species. But in the world, as far as that scientists know, there's about 2,000 different species of termites. With just in the United States, there's about 40. And then no one could really agree on a number as far as the Midwest or in Nebraska. I saw everything from 2 different species to 20 different species. So it just really depends on the climate and the atmosphere and if there's food to eat. So Usually though, when you see them, they're about 1/4 of an inch to about 1/2 an inch long. They're very soft bodied insects. I guess it depends on, they have a caste system, which we will talk about. It's like a level system that we hear about sometimes, but again, we'll talk more about that in a little bit. But queens and kings, there are both of them. They generally reach a little bit bigger in size. So they're about 1 inch long, and all of the other animals that we're going to talk about are going to be a little bit smaller. They can totally vary in color. They could be white, light brown, really dark brown. And it also depends on their role in the colony, depending on what color they're going to be. So they, what we call the worker termites, if you've ever heard worker bees, basically the same thing. They appear often lighter. A lot of people will think that these are the larvae. Well, they're just the worker bees, or sorry, they're just the worker termites. And there's also something called swarming termites. These are going to be a little bit darker. Again, those terms are kind of just meaning within their caste system, or like kind of the level of what they do in the colony. And then we also have flying termites. These are called reproductives, and they have 2 pairs of prominent wings. So if you ever see what you think is a termite and they have very large, substantial looking wings, these are going to be called those flying termites or reproductives. And then the termites, like we have talked about, they have a caste system. And we'll talk a little bit about exactly what that means. So a caste system is basically their duties and their role within the colony. So termites are social animals. They live within this huge bunch of other termites, and they each have a specific role that they play within their colony. That is their job, and that is who they take care of, and this is what they follow. So even species that are the same, depending on what system or caste system they are in, what level, they can look different from each other. So termites are sometimes very hard to tell species because 2 species could be exactly the same, but one's a worker and one is a soldier, and they're going to look very different from each other. So unless you are a termite expert, it's going to be very hard to tell these apart sometimes. So the worker termites, these are the ones that are going to be doing basically a lot of the work, and they are kind of the lower level of that caste system. They're usually lighter in color. They're the smallest termites. So when you see really, really tiny ones, you can maybe assume that those are the worker ones, and they're very soft bodied. And these are the ones that a lot of times people think are the larvae. Oftentimes they are not, they are just simply the worker termites. There's also soldiers. These are going to be the hard bodied ones. They have fully mature when they have wings on them. They're going to be darker in color, and they're going to have very large jaws. So if you see this photo here, these are going to be the soldiers. If you notice their kind of mandibles or their jaws that are moving closer together, these are going to be the ones that are going to be constantly chewing and basically degrading your house or your business or something like that. So, and then we also have the flying termites, or sometimes people call them the swarming termites. These are going to have wings. They're going to have very hard exoskeletons, so the outside of their body. They have 2 sets of wings, and their wings are going to be extremely long. These are going to be 2 times the size of their body, so they're very, very prominent when you see them. All right, the reason I had to go tell you this is because this is how they build their homes. It depends on their level in the caste system, and it depends on what part of the home they are making or what structure they are making. So in Nebraska, I did find kind of things that people did agree on is what kind of termites we have. So one of them are just called subterranean termites. So these are fairly common in the United States, and we have them here in Nebraska. These are the ones that are going to be chewing and damaging pretty much anything. The thing is, people think that they eat wood, and they do, they chew on it, but this is not where they get their nutrition. So termites have a lot of microorganisms in their gut, and what they will do is they actually will chew and chew and chew on wood, and then they turn that wood and the fiber from the wood into something called cellulose, and that is where they get their nutrition. So termite could eat wood all day, every single day, and if they don't have those things in those microorganisms in their guts to convert that to cellulose, they could starve to death. So that is how they get their nutrients. They also will, the foraging workers will eat, and then what they will do is they will feed what we call the immatures, the soldiers and the reproductive. So they do this through a mouth-to-mouth process called trophallaxis. And so once it sits in their gut for a while, it changes to cellulose, and then that is what they will feed to their immatures so that they can develop. One thing I do want to show you is if you've ever, this picture here is if you've ever seen this in your house. This is not good. This is a definite thing that you have termites here. But you see these little rolls and they look like tubes. These are very important for termites because this is how they travel from place to place. So they will actually build little, they look like subway tubes that they can move from place to place. And each of these tubes actually have a different structure and a different meaning. So they will build these below the soil. Within a single colony, there could be anywhere from 60,000 to 1 million termites. It just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So basically within this colony, there's a network of small rooms and tunnels, and each room and tunnel has a specific reason for being built. So either it's for storing food, it's for escaping, it's for raising young. They each have a special purpose. Oftentimes it's very hard to find the actual colony. You will see those kind of tube looking things. And now that I know what those are, they were all over the walls of Game and Parks down in the basement, but it's all gone now. But now I know what they are. So overall, the whole point of having this colony and building those tubes is to expand their feeding or their foraging areas. And that is how they're finding their food. So they will feed above the ground, but to do so, they have to do what's called exploratory tubes. And basically they're built out of mud and fecal matter. And this is how they explore to find those new foraging areas. They will also make something called utility tubes. This is for very long distances, so they take longer time to make. They also have something called drop or suspended tubes, and then they also have something called swarming tubes. These are only about 4 to 8 inches above the ground, so if you ever find a termite colony, hopefully not in your house, but if you ever see one, you can kind of even see these different types of tubes. They each have different reasons why they were built. All right, so we don't have these in Nebraska, but I did want to say them because this is what people think of when they think of termite colonies. So this really large one that you see is called a cathedral termite mound. These can be huge. They can get anywhere from 8 meters tall. They can weigh over 22,000 pounds. And remember, all this is built out of is like mud and fecal matter. So that's a lot of working. That's a lot of usage within that colony. So one thing that's kind of neat about termites is clearly they make these cool structures, but something else is that people believe, and they have scientific evidence to back this up, that the way that they make their termite mounds, they never have the sun shine directly on the surface of the mound. Otherwise, it's going to be too hard to keep it moist in there, and it's going to desiccate or dry out. Sometimes the shape of the mound is dependent on the temperature regulation. So the one that you see that kind of looks pointy like that cathedral, this one right here, it will literally have like air conditioning units in it to keep it from getting so hot. So there's different vents that go up and down that literally blow air in and out of it. The one over on the left side, the magnetic termite mound, it's really flat. So this actually will absorb part of the sun, but then when the sun moves over time, it will get cooler. So termites are not stupid. They know what they're doing. So, and one thing that's kind of neat is in Australia, they have these huge termite mounds. And what they found is that the amount of biomass that termites just process on their own is equivalent to like large mammals eating grasses and prairies in those prairies and savanna habitats. So they're very important, even though we find them often very pesty. All right. So there's also something called a caddis fly, which people don't know that we have. These little things, they kind of look like moths. They're kind of fuzzy. They're attracted to light. They're usually around freshwater habitats. Just within the world, there's about 7,000 known species of what we call caddis flies. They lay their eggs in masses, usually about 800 or so within a single mass. They produce silk, which is kind of cool because moths do as well. And what they will do is in their immature or their larva stage, they will build these cases around them, and they will use debris and leaf litter and rocks and sand and pebbles to kind of keep themselves protected in this case. And then they will kind of cocoon themselves in, they'll close up both ends, and then about 2 weeks later, they will hatch into these adult looking moth-like creatures. So these caddis fly cases are super cool because they build them on their own. So this is the larva within this case that you see. And this basically is just their silk that they use. It's very sticky, so they will glue hard materials such as stone, sand, dried leaves on here that they use to protect themselves. So they make sure that to use the stuff that's around them, because this is what's going to best camouflage them within their habitat. So they will also leave holes for their legs and their head so that they never have to leave their house when they eat, which is kind of nice. And then their silk, what they will do is, how do they eat? Well, what their silk will do, they actually use it to make fishing nets or meshes to catch food in the flowing river. And these animals are so smart that they know how big and small to make those fishing lines depending on the current of the river. So if it's a very fast current, they want to make it a little bit bigger because it's going to be harder to catch food. If it's a slow moving current, they make it smaller so that they can catch their food. So here's the kind of one that I found. This one has like seashells on it and things. And then here's some that are a little bit more common that you're going to find in Nebraska. These are just simply very, very small rocks and stones. So each of those little tubes or those casings that you see, that is an immature caddis fly. So once it hatches out of this, it becomes that adult moth-like creature that we see. And here's another one, just different stones and different habitats. There are some that have like leaves on them. I saw one that was like gold cases on it. So whatever this animal used, it doesn't really care. It just uses those resources around it. All right, this one I feel like is a little bit of a stretch here. When I say monarch butterflies, I really mean butterflies and moths in general, because they are animal architects. They build those cocoons and they build those chrysalises. So monarchs are kind of ones that are just easily recognized and everyone knows what they are. So this is a monarch butterfly. They're one of the most, like I said, recognizable butterfly species. They are a migrant visitor of Nebraska, so they come and then they leave. As caterpillars, we know that they feed on milkweed. Caterpillars will grow and they will molt several times over that 2-week period-ish that they are a caterpillar, and then they will form a chrysalis if they are a monarch, if they are a butterfly, and a moth will form a cocoon. So over time then, when they are in that cocoon or that chrysalis, they will undergo something called metamorphosis, or just a fancy word for change, to that adult butterfly. So chrysalises, caterpillars will make them using the silk in the caterpillar. So if you can see here, this branch that's hanging down, there's kind of a little button of silk up here, and then this black stem. So that is how the butterfly or the chrysalis will attach to that branch. So they use a hook to attach it, and then basically they twist around and they embed their silk onto that little button so that they are able to make that chrysalis then. So once the caterpillar sheds its skin for the very last time, they shed their skin and then they have that chitin, that hard exoskeleton type material that chrysalises are made out of, and that is how they will build that chrysalis. So again, then over time, they will change and transform into that butterfly. All right, so paper wasps. So we have these in Nebraska. We have a few different species. This is kind of just a general paper wasp talk about here, but they get their name because of the paper-like material that they use to build their nests. So they don't steal paper from, paper companies, and they don't go find it on the side of the street, but they simply make it themselves. Sometimes people call them umbrella wasps because they hang down their nests and they kind of look like umbrellas. They're taller and bigger and wider at the top and then slowly get a little bit more pointy. These animals are what we call vespid wasps. So they sting. They're semi-social creatures. They live in very small colonies, but unlike those termites, they do not have a caste system. They are equals. They are not workers and foragers and kings and queens. They're simply just paper wasps. A lot of people confuse these with yellow jackets. They look very similar to each other, but one kind of big difference is that paper wasps are going to be very small in the waist. We call them a little slim in their waist. They eat nectar and other insects, including caterpillars and flies. They're mostly brown and they have some yellow on them, but then wasps, yellow jackets, and hornets, a lot of people get those confused. They're very similar because they all make nests, like this paper kind of nest, but the way you can kind of tell them apart is their size, the shape, and the location of their nests. So specifically, paper wasp nests, in the springtime, they will emerge and they will build these umbrella-shaped nests, as we talked about, and they're built out of paper. They usually find a spot to hang their kind of comb-like or the honeycomb shaped nest. A lot of time it's places like your soffits, your eaves, your attic rafters, somewhere where they can just simply hang down. Each nest will also have uncovered cells. As you can kind of see here, those hexagonal shaped cells. This is where they lay their eggs. They make their own building materials by simply turning raw wood into paper pulp. So the queen will find some wood, she'll chew it, very similar to those termites, and then her microorganisms and saliva will turn that into this paper pulp-like thing, and then over time it will dry and harden into this kind of crusty thing. If you've ever touched a wasp nest, it's like crunchy. So over time it hardens. The workers will also help her form these hexagonal shaped cells. And again, they do that so that is where they can put their eggs. And then again, over time, as that pulp dries, it will become this sturdy nest. Some species, I couldn't find exactly which ones, but what they will do is that they will use mud as just a little bit more of a strengthener to make those nests. But again, not all species will do that. And then here's some different ones. This one is very, like we talked about, that hexagonal shapes. Not all of them look like that. There's ones that are more circular here. But again, you can kind of see this paper-like form, and this is what it's going to look like. So again, different species make different shapes and locations of their nest. All right, so I know they are not insects, so they kind of fit within this arthropod thing here, but spiders. So spiders are one of the like quintessential animal architects that I think of. So they make webs, not all of them, but they will make webs out of silk. So that natural fiber, which is going to be protein. So spiders have structures called spinnerets on their abdomen, which is that very kind of back part, their butt, essentially, usually on the underside. And then what happens is that different species have different numbers of spinnerets. Again, depending if they are a garden spider or if they are a wolf spider, which don't make webs, but they still have them. So at the very end, each spinneret then has a collection of what we call spigots or a nozzle. So if you water your garden, there's all those little holes, kind of similar structure, but a single silk thread then comes out of each. And again, depending on the species, depends on how many of those they have. So not all spiders are going to make webs, but all spiders have silk. Why do they still need those? A lot of spiders will use something called a drag line. So when they make their nest or their web, they have this line that they can basically travel up and down. You might have heard of something called ballooning. This is just kind of a massed widespread of spiders. This is how they travel to and from. Also, females will wrap their eggs in the silk. So all spiders have silk, but not all spiders make webs. Also, spider silk is incredibly strong and tough. So the same weight in steel, spider thread or silk is going to be about 5 times stronger than steel of the same diameter. So it's very strong, hard material, and is almost as strong as Kevlar, which is what they use to protect themselves, or people, sorry. So there are different types of spider webs. It depends on who you talk to. Some say there's 3, some say there's 5. I kind of went with all of them here just to show you. But there's these typical orb webs, which is in this photo here. This is going to kind of be the common spider web that you're going to see. These are the ones that you're going to find a lot in Nebraska. They look like a wheel with spokes in it. They're typically very large. They're found outdoors, and they are suspended in midair. Sometimes you will walk through them as you are walking in the forest, or you walk through them on your way out to the garden. They could be pretty much anywhere. Something else that we also hear a lot about are tangle webs or sometimes cobwebs. So they lack symmetry. They're very just kind of a jumbled mess, but they are still spider webs. So they are tangled oftentimes, and they are attached to that support system that's very similar to the triangle web that we'll talk about here. So there is something else called a sheet web, which is branches of silk that are basically in a sheet. So sometimes it's through blades of grass or over very low growing plants like moss. They will have this huge bunch of kind of crisscross threads that looks like someone just laid a sheet out. There's also something called a funnel web, very large, no idea what's going on, very large, flat, horizontal webs that have openings in them. And I will show you a photo here in a second. These are so the spider can escape. And then triangle webs. So triangles have 3 sides, same thing with the web that we'll show you here in a second. These are going to be connected on the ends, and they're going to be, they almost look fuzzy when you see them. So here's some photos. We all have probably seen a tangle web or a cobweb before. That's kind of like Halloween right there. This is a triangle one, this black photo here. This is a triangle. You can see there's 1, 2, 3 ends, and it looks like a triangle. And then here is a funnel web. So kind of a big sheet here, and then there's this little tiny hole so that spiders can go in and they can go out. This is a great escape route for them. All right, and I think, yes, we'll go ahead and, I can't get my bar to come up here. I'm gonna stop sharing really fast, but do we have any questions or anything that maybe I can answer? It looks like Amber has done a very good job. So I think we're—
Monica, can you hear me? Just checking.
Okay. I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Amber, so.
No problem, just wanted to check. We're good.
We good? Okay, perfect. All right, back to sharing here. All right, so now we're going to get into some mammals. I bet some of you know one of them at least that we're going to talk about. So when we talk about mammals, there's not as many as there are insects. Like I didn't even cover ants today. That was probably a huge one that I should have as well, but we only have so much time. So beavers are one that a lot of people kind of think like quintessential animal architect right here. So these are going to be rodents. They're semi-aquatic. They live together in groups. They're the second largest rodent in the world, right behind the capybara. And they are one of the most like skilled animal architects. They get to about 65 pounds, which people think beavers are small, but they're pretty big and fat and round. They have very poor eyesight, but they have a great sense of smell. They're herbivores, so a lot of people think they're fish eaters. They're not. They eat things like willow and aspen trees. They eat bark and some semi-aquatic plants, lots of different things, but no fish. A lot of people, especially within Nebraska, people that live by the rivers or the water, or even farmers, they see them as pests. They see them as animals that change the landscape and that flood their fields, or they back up waterways. There's lots of different reasons why people might not like them. However, they are considered a keystone species. So this simply put just means that without these animals, there's a trickle-down effect of all these other animals that rely on beavers. And we'll kind of get to that in here in a second. So what do beavers do? Well, we know they build dams and they build lodges. So there's 2 different things. People usually think the dams are their homes. However, that is incorrect. The lodges are going to be their homes. So dams is what I have a photo of here. This is what they do to block up the rivers. And then behind it, what will happen is it kind of slows the river down, and it makes a really good habitat for a lot of different animals. This is why they are called a keystone species, because a lot of those animals survive because that beaver dammed up that river. And then a lodge is going to be the place where they live. So what a beaver does is they first find a good solid foundation in the center of a lake to basically make this dam. They will pile on branches and leaves until it surfaces out of the water, like on this photo here. Oftentimes for their lodge or even the dam, they will make roofs. A lot of the times this is going to be for their home. They don't want to get wet. They don't want to get rained on. They don't want to get cold, that kind of stuff. So they'll build this kind of dome-shaped top made of branches, leaves, interwoven grasses, and then they will place a very thick layer of mud on top that over time will harden to make a roof for their house. Once the structure is complete, they will then literally decorate their house. They will make doors that are only accessible underwater. This is to help them escape from predators. They'll make chimneys for air flow and conditioning. They make a security fence. So a fence, basically a bunch of sticks made out of mud. and castoreum, which, if you know beavers, the castor oil thing, it smells, it's very powerful. It's a good deterrent for predators to come into that area. And then the lodge itself, within it, there's different rooms. If you've ever been to the Omaha Zoo, there's a great example of a lodge. You can kind of see inside of it. There's that plexiglass there. That's going to be what it looks like. Very big, spacious, open, and then there's those little holes that they can dip in under the water. All right, something I do want to talk about, we talked about beavers as being a keystone species. They're super important, but why? So beavers, and wolves here are kind of a different part of the story, but beavers and wolves basically changed the landscape and changed Yellowstone. So over the time, what has happened is that wolves and beavers have slowly been leaving Yellowstone National Park. They changed the course of the rivers. Basically over time, this has decreased the plant and the animal diversity within Yellowstone, just these two species. So the whole story goes that there's a lot of elk and a lot of deer. Wolves were the ones kind of taking care of those predation of those animals, so they didn't build up their carrying capacity, or basically too many wolves or too many deer and elk for a certain area. Wolves were kind of keeping that in check. Beavers, they would eat the aspen and the willow trees. And what happens is the more elk and the more deer there are, the more they're eating those aspen and willow trees, which makes beavers not have enough food. So the beavers left, the wolves have been gone for a while, but they came back. So without beavers, the flow of the river, it could not basically sustain all these really cool animal populations like birds, amphibians, small mammals, fish. All of these things that relied on those beavers were simply having a very hard time because those beavers weren't there anymore. So the water has become faster, it's become deeper, and a lot of these species can't adapt that quickly. So what's happening over time is the wolves have come back. They've reintroduced them, but willows have not been recovering like they want them to. It's kind of a slower pace than they would like to see. So beavers are very, very slowly returning. I think the last thing I saw was there was like 30 beavers within the whole Yellowstone National Park. That's not very many. So over time, what they want to do is they've kind of artificially made some dams to help these species, but it's not working like a natural dam from a beaver would do. I did find this photo. This is actually a beaver dam or a lodge in Yellowstone. So we know that they're there. There's just not as many as they would like. So hopefully more beavers come back in the future. All right, prairie dogs. This is another what we call keystone species, another animal that's considered a huge pest, especially a lot of people in Nebraska, in western Nebraska, where they're found. So like beavers, they modify their habitats. They make these huge burrows really close together. They're called colonies or towns. That's supposed to say towns, not toes. And then further, they're divided into little neighborhoods and then individual kind of families or coteries. So each little coterie is formed with a bunch of different animals. And kind of like this caste system, individuals have specific activities or jobs that they need to do within this little group. They eat a lot of vegetation and grasses. Prairie dogs used to be in the hundreds of millions. They've kind of really declined just because of intentional killings and habitat loss. They really prefer these sandy soils just because it's easier for them to dig these burrows. So what does a prairie dog town look like? So this is a very shallow one, but they can go 7 to 15 feet deep. The tunnels are very complex. They're usually U-shaped and they have different rooms within them. What they will do is throughout their town, they will cut down any grass that's growing more than 6 inches tall. Because if you think about it, prairie dogs stand on their hind legs to look for predators. If the grass is too tall, they can't see anything. If you've ever seen a prairie dog town, you see usually them sitting out and there's a mound of dirt around them. This is to prevent flooding. So they keep that mound really built up so that the water doesn't flow into their town and drown the prairie dogs in there. They have multiple entrances. So if a predator, like let's say a black-footed ferret, would happen to get in there, they can escape a different way. They have a nesting chamber towards the bottom. This is really lined with dry grass so that it's soft. There's listening chambers that are located near the entrance so that they can listen if there's a predator around, and then they can warn their other friends if there's some predators going around. And then a single prairie dog town at one time in their heyday could span hundreds of acres and contain thousands of animals at one time. So if you think about it, when Lewis and Clark were here, just think about how many different prairie dog towns there were within this, the Western United States. So there were a lot. All right, any chats? Thanks, Amber, for doing this. I think
Yes,
Amber,
and Monica, I know you can't hear me, but I'm answering some
Covered?
of these really great questions. But I'll message you that.
All right. I'm so sorry I can't hear any of you. I will just kind of keep going. And Amber, it looks like you're doing a great job. So I really, really appreciate that. Thank you. All right. So we'll go ahead and move on here just so we can keep for time. I do have a fish species that I do want to talk about. A lot of people don't think of fish as animal architects. There's not a lot of them, but there are some. One of them I do want to talk about is something called a Brook stickleback. So not like the most sexy looking fish, but they're still very cool. They're freshwater fish. We do have in Nebraska. They're kind of an olive green color. Again, not the prettiest. They're mottled. They have lots of spots on them. And then kind of like a characteristic thing of these Brook sticklebacks is that they have these spines located on the back or on the top there. They actually don't have scales. They're very smooth and instead have little bony plates. And then their lateral line, which is kind of their sensory line that runs kind of horizontal, almost perfectly horizontal on the fish. They help sense things. They have lots of little pores on that lateral line. They really like areas and rivers and streams that are not cloudy with a lot of vegetation. That's just their favorite habitat. They eat aquatic insect larvae, land insects, worms, snails, and sometimes even other fish's eggs. So it was hard to get a good picture, so I apologize for the kind of blurry pictures here. That's kind of the best I could find. But these males will actually build nests, which is kind of neat because you don't think about a fish building a nest. So during the late spring and early summer, males will kind of spread out and they will look for a perfect area for their territory. They like it in the weeds just because then they don't have to worry about predators as much. But what they will do is they'll use algae, sticks, and kind of plant matter, and they make this sticky, kind of not silk, but sticky secretion like a glue from their kidneys to build this golf ball sized nest. So they'll use the sticky stuff, they'll put stuff in there to make a nest, and then they have an opening on one end that attaches to the stem of the plant so that they don't run away or they don't current away. When females enter the male territory, the male will pretty much rush her towards the nest like, hey, look at my nest, it's super cool, lay your eggs here. If she likes it, she'll lay the eggs and then he will immediately fertilize them. He'll then go back trying to recruit other females to do the same, and then he will again fertilize them as they come in. Once done with the spawning, the male will guard usually the 50 or 100 or so eggs until they hatch. And it was kind of funny when I was reading some articles, it was saying it will, he will watch them until he can't control them anymore. So it's kind of like when they start going everywhere, he's just like, yep, I'm done, I'm out. So I think a lot of us with kids can kind of maybe agree with that statement. So, all right. And our last bunch of animals here that we're going to talk about are birds. So there were a ton of different birds that I could have talked about. One that were really neat, we do not have in Nebraska, social weaver birds. They build these huge, huge nests with all these little holes poking out in places like Africa. But we do have a couple cool birds that I'm sure a lot of us has heard of. So Baltimore Orioles, which you might be seeing right now. I just saw some last weekend. They're these medium-sized birds that kind of have the orange breast on them. The males usually look like this and they have that orange rump on their tail feathers. The female is a little bit more different colored. She usually has like a brownish, kind of a yellowish head. She's not as brightly colored as the male. Mostly people hear them before they see them. They like to eat fruit from vines and bushes. They like deciduous trees, but they don't like to be found in deep forests. They like open woodlands, the edges of forests. You can a lot of times see them in parks, backyards, pretty much anywhere, your house. And they make these super cool, what's called pendulum nests. So they kind of hang down and look like a sock. It's a very unique thing for birds. No other birds do this, quite like the Baltimore Oriole. Basically, they have different stages of building. They usually hold about 7 nests. And they're lined with downy feathers so that the eggs are nice and cushioned and they don't fall out. But the female will choose kind of whatever is around her habitat. So this could be grasses. This could be, I was seeing some photos that had like fishing line. There was and I've heard a couple people in Lincoln even talk about this, that they found Oriole nests that were completely 100% made out of fishing line. I think one was found at Holmes Lake here in Lincoln because that was what was readily available for this bird. The thing is, fishing line is super lethal for a lot of birds because they get tangled in it. But then you have this bird using fishing line to build her nest. So it's kind of ironic and it's really cool because that is the resources that she's using. So first of all, they will find a good breeding site. The female will start winding the fibers around a branch to make the support system so it doesn't fall. And then the female will make these kind of rapid thrust movements with her beak to form this pouch. Like I said, it's like a sock, and then it hangs down over time. And she will find different types of fibers for different parts of the nest. So she uses really flexible fibers to create the outer bowl because it needs to be stretchy, and then springier fibers for inside because over time the birds are going to grow and hatch out of the eggs and they need a little bit more room. And then when she finishes, like I said, she puts those downy fibers inside to provide a cushion for the eggs. And it takes about 2 weeks sometimes to completely finish this nest. One thing that's really neat is that they're very strong nests. You will see them sometimes for years over time. Things like robin nests or blue jay nests, they kind of dissipate after a while. They just don't last. These last a long time. All right, another bird I want to talk about in Nebraska are our swallows. We're seeing a lot of them now. They're compact birds, they have really pointy beaks, and they have like a squared off tail, depending on what species you're looking at, but they're normally metallic. The ones that I'm thinking of are cliff swallows. Their face is kind of a rusty colored, and they have this cinnamon colored rump on them. They zoom around in these cool aerial patterns to catch insects on their wings. Traditionally, they build nests on vertical cliff faces, but over time they've had to adapt to a lot of urban dwellings. So bridges, overpasses, even culverts. Usually there's a water component though. They really like water because that's usually where a lot of the insects are. So they build these really cool constructed nests out of basically balls of mud that they collect with their beaks. And this photo here, all these birds by this mud hole, that's what they're doing. They're looking for things to build their nest out of. A lot of the times you will see them built up on vertical walls. They like barns, bridges, really large buildings. One thing that's neat about these birds is that both the male and the female will build the nest. They'll add mud balls. They start from the bottom and then they use the very top of the rim to form this like jug shaped nest. They will not add sticks, but sometimes they add grasses and feathers to make it a little bit softer. And then the nests are super packed together. They're colony birds. There's been reports about 6,000 nests in a single colony. I'm sure you've seen this before, but here was the best photo that I could get that was free for us to use. But if you Google search it, there's a huge bunch of these cliff swallow nests, and all you see are these tiny little holes everywhere because this is so many birds collecting together in that colony. So very cool looking things. And if you look close enough at it, you can see those little they look like big rocks. Those are those little dabs of mud that over time they've just compacted together and hardened into these nests. I think that's it. Yep. So that's all that I have for animal architects this week. But next week, we're going to switch it up and talk about trees in Nebraska. So we're going to learn about some trees that we have here in Nebraska, some kind of common ones, different types of bark, what trees do for us. Are they poisonous? Like all this different kind of cool stuff about trees. So make sure you join us next week as well, Thursday, June 3rd already from 3 to 4 p.m. And then we have 4 more of our summer Science Of series. So June 3rd, we're going to be talking about trees. And then June 10th, I'm really excited. I'm excited about all of them, but shrews, moles, and voles, really excited about those. Nature differences, we're going to be talking about like a wasp versus a hornet, or a toad versus a frog, a coyote versus a fox. So just different characteristics that make them unique. And then 24th, I'm extremely excited about this one because I get to talk about sturgeon. So got a lot of different topics still coming up. But again, Thursdays, next 4 Thursdays in a row from 3 to 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. Each of these do have a different registration link. So be sure to register for them. And then if you really like Science Of, be sure to check out our education YouTube channel under the playlist Science Of. And then we also have a wildlife education Facebook page, a Instagram page, and then our general wildlife education website. So at the very end as well, tomorrow I will be sending you an evaluation asking to kind of talk about what you enjoyed, what you'd like to see, how did you hear about this? And then I'm just saying there might be like an incentive if you fill out an evaluation. So I'd really appreciate that. And I'd love to send you some swag here. But are there any questions or anything like that? How are wasps different than hornets? That's a great question. You're going to have to tune in on that Thursday to answer your question. So I believe that was June 13th or so. It was the second to the last one. So, yeah, a lot of people have said they see these kind of weird Baltimore Oriole nests and they didn't know what they were. Now I hope that you do. You see them quite often, especially in the winter then when all the leaves are gone. You see them still hanging down in the winter time. And like I said, some birds, I don't think they reuse them very often. They just make new ones, but they're so strong and sturdy. They can last for years because the bird has woven those grasses and or that fishing line or something into them so strong that they just stay up through the wind and the snow and the rain and things like that. Think. Thanks for answering the beaver dam question. All right, perfect. Really appreciate that. Someone asked, where do the beavers build their lodges? Are they located near the dam or inside the dam? What is the specific reason the beaver builds the dam? They basically, and I think Amber might have answered this already, but they build the beaver dam because not just simply because they want to, but because the river or the stream in the lake might just simply be too fast for their liking, and they don't want the lodge, their actual home, to drift away over time. So they do this. They don't really know that they're helping all these other animals. They just do it because they know to do it. And so again, that's why they're those keystone species, is simply because they really want to build their home, and then they're just simply kind of second-handedly helping out those other birds, fish, amphibian, snakes, that kind of stuff. So, all right. Someone asked about squirrel nests. Yeah, the squirrel nests are actually kind of cool too, if you've ever looked at those. I always thought as a kid that they were just really big bird nests. I didn't know any better. I didn't, again, know that squirrels built nests. I could have covered those today. There's a lot of animals that I didn't. If you've ever heard of like a bowerbird, we do not have them in Nebraska, but I really encourage you to look them up. I think they're in... I'm not even going to tell you where they are because I don't know, but they are very cool animals, and they will build these cool little walkways for the ladies to go underneath. So there's a lot of animals that I did not even cover today, just simply because of time. So yes. All right. I think That is it. Thank you so much, Amber. And again, please fill out an evaluation. I'll send that to you tomorrow. And again, please feel free to join us next week, June 3rd, for our next Science of Nebraska Trees. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.